It's a little known fact, but Jane Austen used Tommy James and the Shondells' Crystal Blue Persuasion as the inspiration for her cheeky love story, Persuasion. I mean, it is true, just don't try to verify the information. That predates Google. But more to the point, Persuasion is the new Netflix adaptation of Austen's novel starring Dakota Johnson. Is it worth checking out? Living with her snobby family on the brink of bankruptcy, Anne Elliot is a nonconforming woman with modern sensibilities. When Frederick Wentworth, the dashing one she let get away, crashes back into her life, Anne must choose between putting the past behind her or listening to her heart when it comes to second chances. So when the movie started out, the acting to me felt a bit flat, like we weren't seeing the best take of a performance. Now this sentiment does not carry out through the rest of the film though. I mean sure, there are a couple of characters that are played more reservedly than I would have preferred, but the feeling of let's just use the first take and move on, that didn't last too long. Jane Austen infuses her comedy into her stories and is even a bit snarky, which then I totally appreciate. Now in this, Dakota Johnson is the star and our narrator, guiding us through the events of her love life filled with witty asides and sarcastic commentary. And you'll notice almost immediately that the fourth wall is completely broken by Johnson's Anne Elliot. Now, she lets us into her world in a hyper-aware way, where we not only get to hear her musings, but we get to see the knowing looks as well. I mean, think of it as you're having a conversation with your best friend, commenting on just the things happening around you. And when someone else does the exact thing that you were just discussing, you look at each other with that knowing glance that makes you smirk. Well, in this, we're the best friend, and even kind of a diary of sorts. Dakota Johnson pulls this off very convincingly. Her sly glances to us arrive with perfect timing. I mean, she'll take in what someone said or did, and while the camera is on her, then she'll slowly move her eyes to us. I mean, it's classic Ferris Bueller, and it worked for me. The romance side of the story is a little different than the typical rom-coms that we typically get. Now here, we're told in the first couple of minutes that Anne used to be engaged to this handsome man, and then their engagement was broken off. Now we're meeting Anne about 8-ish years from that point where she's not totally moved on emotionally. The characters that surround Anne are at varying levels of effectiveness. She's got an older sister who's barely in the story, so she's not really much of a consequence. But then also Anne has this married sister named Mary, who is whiny and narcissistic, and it's hard not to laugh at her constantly throughout this. She's also not totally in tune with her own narcissism, so we get to watch sarcasm directed at her that completely goes over her head, and that in itself is funny. Cosmo Jarvis, who plays Wentworth, the man Anne used to be engaged to, he was hard for me to like in this. I mean, he's kind, but not a terribly charismatic person. If you've never seen the dude, now I saw him in an indie film with Barry Cowan called Calm with Horses, and while the movie isn't one to just drop everything for, Jarvis was really good and understated in that one. But back to Persuasion, Wentworth is meant to be the one who got away, just this person whom Anne might get a second chance with. And that's the whole premise of this story. There's the possibility of a second chance at love. While there are conflicting feelings between Wentworth and Anne, the introduction into Anne's life of a handsome suitor causes some ripples. Henry Golding stars as the suitor, Mr. Elliot, and he's actually not in the movie for nearly as much as I thought he would be. I thought his acting was fine, but the role as played out in the movie is slightly flirty, a bit arrogant, but then also a mental match for Anne. I mean, he does have an impact, but he's also just sort of there. His presence isn't overly noteworthy, but it's not detrimental to the movie either. And that takes me back to my original point where the characters felt a little bit flat at the beginning. Now sure, we do get some demonstrative and emotional characters, and the line deliveries do get much better and more convincing after that initial sequence, but everything outside of Anne and maybe Mary, they just feel subdued. There's a flatness to so much that removes the oomph that we just love to have and need in a romance story. And as much as I wanted to be, I wasn't really invested in either Wentworth or Mr. Elliot as love interests for Anne. She's a strong character, which makes her a lot of fun to watch because she can match wits and attitudes with anybody, and she's not afraid to do so either. And the two men can hold their own, but neither really felt like they deserved her. And even though we're told that Anne has never really gotten over her breakup with Wentworth, I'm not sure I buy her pining after him as the story suggests. Now luckily there are some humorous moments that are sprinkled throughout the story too, and not all of them are delivered by Dakota Johnson. Now, Richard E. Grant plays Anne's father, and while he's not in it a ton, he tackles the role with abandon. I mean, he makes me chuckle at his deliveries, and they're made even better because of his mannerisms. Nikki Amuka Bird, who I love as DCI Aaron Gray and Luther, which is an aside, but she gets some quietly comedic moments where the humor is subtle, but also it put a smile on my face. Now, the movie is an hour and 47 minutes, and it flows pretty well. The whole thing is a bit quieter, and it's more driven by dialogue than by action, but I never got bored with it. So overall, Persuasion is a decent rom-com, helped greatly by Dakota Johnson's ability to draw us in with her literal winks and smiles. While I was invested in the story, the romance angle never really captured my heart, making me look forward mostly to seeing what kind of snarky remarks or looks Johnson would give us. The theme of second chances is a great one to explore, but I don't feel that we get the depth necessary to make that examination lasting or impactful. Now, the production looks great with some amazing costume designs and sets that really transport us to the early 1800s. And while this could be considered a casual watch, if you take your eyes off the screen, you're going to end up missing the strengths that Johnson brings to the film. And while I was entertained, the presentation was missing that emotional punch where I felt I would have been devastated if a wrong choice was made. I would have been fine with the character of Anne continuing on until she's met the one who truly made all of our hearts swoon. There's no sex other than some mild suggestions, no nudity or modern profanity, and not really any violence. I give Persuasion 3 out of 5 couches. So what are you watching right now? Anything great? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, because what I've been watching has been a lot of poo lately. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.